All right, what's up, folks? We're here with a new episode of Talking Shizzle. Dave, I'm super excited to see you, to talk to you. You've got a lot going on in your life. Dave Raley, founder of Imago Consulting. What is up, man?
I would like to say not much because isn't that the normal American response? Or busy? That's the other American response.
Yeah.
But no, it's just an incredible. We're recording this in January. It's just like this year feels like I was thinking about those yeah, SpaceX launch videos where
Uh-huh.
you just like any rocket, honestly, where you watch the launch and it's just like you see the smoke and you see the fire and then it's like, okay, what's going to happen next? This
Yeah.
January feels like just the beginning momentum of the of liftoff, and so I'm
Oh,
just like I'm exhausted, but I'm on fire. Like this feels so good.
I I love that. Okay, there is a side note on that. There's a documentary I was watching maybe over the Christmas break or right before that about rockets. And I
Okay,
I I don't remember the name of
I
it
will
at
Google
all,
it. Rockets,
but I am
Taylor.
going I'm going to find out what that thing was I watched. Well, it was actually really interesting because it was about how much there is in space technology
Oh yeah,
that we're like, most of us aren't even aware of, like, what's really going on with, like, satellites and, like, this whole huge industry now.
millions.
So, like,
Yeah, stuff
yeah, so,
orbiting
like,
us.
we know of, like, SpaceX and stuff like that, but there's all these rocket companies now trying to, like, own the market on rockets and
Private space exploration.
private. Yes, yes. So that's another conversation, but tell me about why you feel like it's, like a rocket ship. So let's, like, get into that.
Well, the big, headline for me is I've got a book coming out in 2 weeks,
Mhm.
and, it's called The Rise of Sustainable Giving, and it's all about the subscription economy, and specifically because of the world that I work in, how charities can take advantage of what's been happening with growing subscriptions. But you and I have talked about this as both as entrepreneurs, as business people. To answer your question more broadly, I'm just coming up on the 3-year mark of launching
Mm.
Imago Consulting. Prior to that, 18 years in the advertising marketing agency space. And there's just something I've noticed, Taylor, and I'm curious as to your thoughts on this. Like stuff
Mhm.
that I've started over the years, either I've personally started, I either ran or started or grew 7 different teams at the agency that I was at. And I noticed that whenever there was something new that was going on, it always took about 2-ish years, 2.5 years for it to really uh, start to take off or to really settle in. It was
Yeah.
like I'd have somebody that was working on a new team for me, and it was about that 2-year mark. It was like, oh, you can do great work, by the way, in the first 2 years. Don't get me wrong, but it's like when
Yeah.
you start to really hit the messaging and you start to figure out
Mhm.
and so I think there's an element of that as well. I mean, I'm curious as to what's been
Yeah.
your experience.
I 100% agree with you with the 2-year mark, and not just in entrepreneurship or, like, launching something new, but I've actually been thinking about this for a really long time over the course of my career. I started noticing, like, I don't know, maybe the first 7, 8 years into my, like, actual professional, career, um, was like things were happening in 2-year sprints or
Mhm.
increments, And I think this is my theory on it, I think it's just enough time to, like, really get into something and sort of, like, become expert at it and, like, work out the kinks. Because I started noticing, like, I was getting promotions, it was like or I was changing roles, and it was, like,
Mhm.
in 2-year increments. And because I think it's, like, there's that first year, like, you launch, you're new in it, you learn a lot, you fall on your face a lot, and then in that second year, you really have enough time to, like, refine things, and I think I've been noticing that too, and this will be relevant as we talk more about the subscription economy, is we launched our subscription-based creative service in 2022, the point of it being to
Mhm.
move the business in that direction, and now 2 years after launch, it's the majority of our business, whereas
Wow.
it took 2 years to become the
Yeah.
majority of the business.
Well, and there's an intentionality there, but I think there's also a little bit, and you and I have known each other. We met in DC at an event you and I were both speaking at, and even from our conversation, I sensed some similar wiring. I actually wrote an
Yeah.
article about it was probably 6 months ago now, and I'll send you a link to it. It's called 2 years or 90%, which
Oh,
was what
really?
my mentor. He's now my mentor, but then he was just some consultant guy that I met about you know, almost 20 years ago now. And Taylor, after we had lunch, and he said, Dave, the way you're wired, like your gifting, your skill set, is you're going to be really dialed in on any one thing, like one, mountain you're trying
Mhm.
to climb or, thing you're trying to launch for about 2 years or 90% complete, whichever comes first. And Taylor,
Yeah.
when I first heard that, I was like, that totally sounds like a backhanded compliment. Like, does that mean I'm flaky or that I change my mind every 2 years or like that I don't finish things? And I wrestled with it candidly. I did not appreciate that
Uh-huh.
compliment. Over my career, I had the same realization that I love to create things. I love to build things. I love to land planes, build bridges. Pick your metaphor. But once it's like pretty much dialed, and we're into like now, let's operate the thing on a 24/7, 365 basis. I'm like, all right. So is there something else that we can do here? And so it really is. It's
Yeah.
not everybody's wired that way, and I'm not trying to like compliment myself. In fact, there are times that that's a drain, but it is a
Mhm.
realization that there are different gifts, and that we can all lean on each other.
Yeah, I've actually had very similar experiences to that and pondered the same things like, "Oh, are you saying I'm a flake?" And no, it's really I do think that there are people who are wired towards operating more, heavily, and there are people who are wired more towards the, like, early stage stuff, and I happen to be wired more towards early stage because, like, after a couple years, I'm like, "I'm ready for a new challenge. Okay, this thing's kind of humming, so, like, let me think about, like, the other new thing," and it's maybe just I just think people are different, so, you know?
Yeah. Well, the
Yeah.
fun thing, and this will bring us to that subscription conversation, is subscriptions by definition need to provide an ongoing
Mhm.
value, right? Now, for you as the business owner, thinking about your own subscription, I would argue that part of bringing ongoing value is innovating and bringing new and increasing what you get for your money and all. Like, there's a
Mhm.
million things you can innovate on top of a subscription. It's not the subscription is for this year and next year we changed it to something completely different. So there's just as much entrepreneurship and innovation, but there is that kind of like, okay, what are we dialing in? What is the sort of ongoing experience? How do we make sure that that's operated at a very high level? But at the same time, how are we bringing increasing additional value to the people who are subscribed?
Yeah, totally. In fact, that is absolutely, what we're doing is this year now. I'm like, "Okay, we've been running it this way for a while. Now it's like it's time to innovate." And so we're about to launch our 2.0 version that's going to include some new exciting things. So let's get into okay, you're about to launch this book. It's all about sustained giving, sustained monthly stuff, and I wanted to talk to you about the subscription economy in this context. So, over the process of writing this book and studying the subscription economy, because I'm fascinated by it, um, what would you say is like a cultural shift that you have seen that's maybe the I don't know, the
Yeah.
foundation
Yep.
for why so many businesses and people are going and nonprofits even, and they're giving, are going and moving in this direction?
That's a great question. I would say that, and especially thinking about my own background prior to this in digital, I've seen a very similar trend where there will be a consumer trend that percolates and ultimately becomes a dominant part of our life and consumer habits that ultimately then has follow-on effects for other areas, including, in my world, philanthropy and nonprofits. So the digital example would be Facebook. Like, I'm old enough, Taylor, that I remember hearing about Facebook after college and being like, oh man, I don't have my alumni email
Yeah.
address. I can't get into this cool new social media platform called Facebook, because in the early days, Facebook was just for university students.
Yeah.
And over time, inevitably, Facebook started to become associated not just with broader social networks, but with purchase behavior. Like, oh, you would actually hear about a product on Facebook. You might even buy it, click on the link in Facebook and get the discounted version of the product. The reason I bring this up, Taylor, is because I was in fundraising at the time, and clients would ask me, like nonprofits would say, "Hey, should we use Facebook for fundraising?" And I'd say, "Not really, because people aren't it's a great place to maybe engage your volunteers, but people are not really giving related to their Facebook presence." Well, what happened was that over time, people started getting comfortable with opening their wallets, with purchasing products related to their social media, lives. And candidly, even in the early days, like just putting your credit card in online was like a big to do. People were nervous, right? What's going to happen? Well, that paved the way. That consumer habit paved the way for what ultimately became a huge philanthropic opportunity. And really, the catalyzing moment was in the late 2000s. It was the Haiti earthquake, if you remember that massive earthquake, just completely devastated the island nation. And I remember Facebook and the American Red Cross partnered up, and like in one day they raised $30 million for charity, and it was like mind blowing to people. And that was really the sort of tipping point for people becoming philanthropically involved in giving related to their Facebook presence. But it wouldn't have been there if we hadn't started with this consumer trend of purchasing products related to your social media presence. So fast forward about 10 years ago, right? We start to see subscriptions hitting our lives. Netflix was one of the early adopters, Amazon Prime. I remember Pandora. Do you remember Pandora, the music service? They're still around, I guess.
I do. I do. I still have an account, I think. It's just like the free
I could
one. But
probably
yeah,
log in. I've moved on to Spotify, but
I think I could log in still.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So the reality is, about 12 years ago now, I started to notice these subscriptions showing up in my life for sure, and in a lot of people's lives. And it turns out that there is that has been such a dominant part of the landscape now for the last decade. Taylor, the average American today, you want to guess how many the average American has subscriptions?
Oh god. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it was like 50 or more.
Yeah. Well, some Americans, I think I'm in that boat. The average American has 12 subscriptions.
Well,
In
okay.
fact,
I was about to
42%.
say 100.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Well,
then I was like,
some of
"That's
us.
too much."
42% of Americans have forgotten that they have a subscription
Yeah.
that they're paying for. Which, by the way, I raise my hand. I'm in that category. I think a lot of people are. They actually did a study recently. They asked Americans, how much do you spend on a monthly basis for subscriptions? And the average American underestimated how much they were spending on a monthly basis by $133 a month. That's
Mhm.
almost $1,700, $1,600 a year that people were spending. They didn't even realize it, right? So
Yeah.
why does that matter? Well, that matters because once it becomes a common part of our sort of culture, our willingness to pay, that starts to open up opportunities for other businesses, services, or in my case, charities that can raise money from donors who historically might not have thought, "Oh, I'll give to this charity monthly." Well, now they're given to, you know, um, Netflix and Microsoft Office 365 and Stitch Fix or whatever, these subscription
Mhm.
boxes. They're essentially engaged in those monthly relationships, which normalizes then philanthropic behavior, other types of subscriptions. And so that's been the thing that I wanted to understand and ultimately led to the book.
Mm. Yeah, and it's interesting because we're now in a place where we buy subscriptions for apps to help us manage our subscriptions.
Absolutely. And by
You
the
know?
way, your philanthropic giving, if you shows up in those apps. So Rocket Money is the
Yeah,
big
like
one that a lot
Rocket
of people talk about.
Money.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it will list here's the charities you're giving to on a monthly basis. I had one the other day, Taylor. It sent me a warning, a very large subscription transactions about to happen. Are you sure you want to
Yeah.
stay subscribed? And I was like alarmed. I was like, what, Taylor, what is this? I opened it up and it was my kids' school tuition payment.
Oh,
uh, because it detected, well, gee, that seems to happen every month.
yeah,
And
this
they're
is,
like, are
like,
you sure?
recurring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So people even today are being reminded, like, are you sure you want to, because subscriptions are not about just tricking people into
No.
recurring transactions. That's the bad side of subscriptions. And the reality
Yeah.
is those don't last because you get fooled once, right? Fool me once.
Yeah.
And so people are much smarter today about discerning, like, when am I actually getting ongoing value, and
Mhm.
and then jump and ship if you're not.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I was actually having this conversation similarly last week, about, like, customer or, in your case, donor experience. I do think one of the cons of the subscription economy is that people do get caught off guard a lot of times, but I think that that comes down to poor communication by the brand, and I think it is on the brand to
Yep.
communicate well, and it's so easy to automate this, to just like, "Hey, you're about to get billed," and those brands that remind me, I have a much higher loyalty to than those brands that don't remind me, where then later I'm kinda like, "Wait a second, I didn't realize I signed up for a free trial for this thing," and, oh god, no, no, I
Yeah, the
really
bait
didn't
and
want that.
switch, the set it
Yeah.
and forget it, I've heard that term. Those are not true. Actually, for the
Yeah.
book, I did quite a bit, not only of just research into the subscription economy, but interviewed a couple people. A gal who really wrote the book on subscriptions and the
Mhm.
subscription economy. Her name's Robbie Kelman Baxter. She wrote two books, actually, one called The Membership Economy and the other called The Forever
Mm,
Transaction. Highly recommend it.
mm,
And
mm,
then I also met with Amy Connery, who is the head of the Subscribed Institute at a company called
mm,
Zora, who specializes in subscription enablement. And she actually, fun enough, coined the term software as a service. We talk about SaaS businesses.
yeah,
Amy's the one that was like, came up with that term back in the day. And so when I talk to them, it's all about ongoing value. It's about delivering an experience. In the book, I talk about 6 different shifts in the subscription economy that we can benefit from and learn from,
mhm,
and that comes from this idea that we can't just trick people into giving to us or
mhm,
transacting with us on a monthly basis, because that's not going to last. Like, that's churn and burn,
mhm,
and the vast majority of the value of your subscribers or your ongoing recurring donors comes after that first transaction. So if you can fool them into the one
mhm,
transaction, that's the bad news, because you need them to stick around for 12 more transactions. In the case of charities, the average donor sticks around for, it depends on the study you look at, but I conservatively, I would say about 40 months, 40 months.
hmm,
So you're going to get 40 more or 39 more monthly gifts on a low end. So you had better provide a great experience
yeah,
and good reporting back and, affirmation and all those sorts of things.
40 months, that's a long time.
Yeah. I'm sure Netflix wishes they could get that.
I know, I was gonna like, that's longer than I would have thought, for sure. I was thinking maybe you were gonna say, like, an average of 8 or 9 months or something like that. 40 kinda blows my mind.
Yeah. No,
Yeah, interesting.
I think generosity, there are some areas where generosity is a little bit different than traditional pure
Yeah,
consumer type subscriptions, where it's like, if I'm not watching, Hulu for a couple months, I'm
yeah,
canceling that subscription. This is not a
yeah,
charity, right? Whereas I might
yeah,
give a little more leeway to the local shelter, that they didn't
yeah,
want to, provide an update, this month or whatever. But still, more and more of those kind of consumer habits tend to bleed over into our philanthropic lives and how we treat
Yeah.
and expect from charities.
Yeah. So you've been in marketing for a long time, and worked at various agencies, started your own. How are you looking at marketing subscription based
Hmm.
services or products or philanthropy versus the old days? Like, do you think
Oh, yeah.
marketing is changing because of this new way of paying for things essentially?
Ooh, that's a big question. I think marketing service firms are certainly changing, as you've just illustrated, right? In terms of
Mhm,
how you provide value, even though what I do, because I don't consider Imago Consulting really an agency, it's more of a consultancy advisory practice
mhm.
because we don't ultimately implement or design or code or, we
Yeah.
don't do any of those things. But, we do coach, and that is an ongoing value
Mhm.
proposition. And obviously, if the coaching isn't very good, then you're not going to continue, but that's a
Yeah.
subscription, right? And so,
Yeah.
I think the field of marketing is changing as well because, and this is a big tension in the charity sector as well. So much of marketing is about, to use a negative term, churn and burn. It's like, how many people can we, drop into the top of the funnel to get out of the bottom of the funnel? And we're operating on tiny, tiny percentages and low margins, and we're just trying to get one more widget out of the donor
Yeah.
or out of the customer. And I think the thing that can be really beautiful about subscriptions is if they're really going to
Yeah.
be successful, they have to be about the customer. Like those are the
Mm.
subscriptions that last. And so I hope that both on the consumer side, the business to business side, as well as in philanthropy, it's going to create better value, better experiences for the folks who are quote unquote subscribing, whether that's a monthly gift to their charity or a quarterly subscription to the
Yeah.
marketing service or or their monthly streaming subscription. Right? Is that realization that you have to provide ongoing value? This is not just about the one-time purchase, just 12 times a year.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about I wanna get into the next phase of this.
Yeah.
So, we know we live in a subscription economy. Our credit cards tell us that. Um, let's talk about a little bit more about why or how to think of this in terms of, like, building predictable income.
Hmm.
And some things and maybe you did in your research for your book, you learned some, like, how to do this well. So whether you're a small business or you're a nonprofit and you're thinking about adding in subscription-based services, products, giving, um, how do you build it in a way that, like, works, that is
Yeah.
sustainable?
Well, I mean, the first part for the book, just speaking about that, the entire first part of the book is why sustainable giving matters.
Mhm.
It almost can be assumed, just like with a subscription business, well, it matters because it's more money on an ongoing basis. But if you look at the market, subscriptions have been so good for business. Zora, the company that Amy Connery, who I mentioned, works with, they publish a subscription index, a subscription business index. And over the last 12 years, they found that the average subscription oriented business, and this is using publicly traded, market data, the average subscription business outperformed the general market and the S&P 500 by 4x, like a
Wow.
compound annual growth rate of almost 17% for 12
Wow.
years. So it's good for business. But again, the only way it's good for business is if it's good for the customer, because you have seen a lot of those churn and burn that have given subscriptions
Mhm.
a bad label. So that's important. Consistent ongoing revenue is obviously important. And the first line of the book, by the way, for charity leaders is January 1st is the worst day of the year. And
Hmm.
this was a quote from a friend of mine, who just said, "Man, you work your butt off. fourth quarter, especially December, is like prime giving season, tax, year-end tax receipts, and it's the holidays and da 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 da, they're doing all these things. And then no matter what you do, you make the budget, you miss the budget, you exceed the budget on December 31st. Guess what? It's January 1st. You get to start over.
Yeah.
And you're like, now I have to rebuild my donor file, my
All of it.
donations. And this happened, by the way, I know I have business friends that like
It's the same.
basically are rebuilding their business every year
It's the
because
same.
like, yeah. So it's like, maybe there's a solution to this, and that might be providing an ongoing value that justifies an ongoing relationship. And so so I just think there's a lot of parallels that we can learn from between those two worlds. But it doesn't have to be. That's the message that the book is about. Like, it does not have to be this way. And increasingly, charities and businesses are able to tap into providing ongoing sustainable value that justifies an ongoing sustainable relationship. And in the charity sector, Taylor, my estimate is 75% of nonprofits have historically been left out of being able to build a strong, growing, recurring giving program. And that's because
Mhm.
they haven't been, one of the 25% of nonprofits that have like what I would call membership, where there's like an actual benefit to the donor. So think of like public television or public radio, where like you might give, but you also then
Mhm.
consume the radio program, or you go to the museum or the local arts institute. Um, those are great for recurring giving programs, by the way. If you can do that, more power to you. But the vast majority of charities can't do that or haven't been able to do that.
Yeah.
And so this is a message of hope and optimism for those 75% of charities that have historically been left behind. But it all came from the business sector, right? And so we're seeing this
Yeah.
opportunity on the consumer and B2B side as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you have to constantly resell hope. Like, that's part of your customer experience. If that, it's like, if you don't have this quote membership thing that you're giving out where you're getting something tangible, then it's on you to make sure, and I wanna get into this next, that the experience that your audience has with you is just always on. And so
Mhm.
that's where, like, just communications come into play. So, like, regular communications about impact and hope, and, like, continuing to, like, it's almost like you're continuing to hit that dopamine thing that people
Mhm.
get when they give. Hey, like, reminding people, like, this is what your money's doing, and, like, you can continue to feel good about it. I think, that's really probably something that you've got a lot of thoughts on.
Yeah. The if 98% of the value of a donor is after the first gift, which is, by the way, that's not a made up statistic. Like, that's how the math works, is 98% of the value of a recurring donor is subsequent to that first donation of whatever
Mhm.
amount. Then you have to think about what that ongoing experience looks like. And you're absolutely right. Affirmation is a huge part of that in the philanthropic sector.
Mhm.
It's like how my gift actually made a difference, and how it made a difference this month, different from last month. But also, and this is where we can learn from the subscription economy, there's these things called upgrades. um,
Yeah.
in the business world, it's very common, right? Oh, okay, what are we going
Oh,
to
yeah.
cross sell or upgrade or enhance? And in the charity sector, for the most part, most organizations have just sort of, hey, thanks for that $25 a month. We're never going to ask you again. And it's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
actually, turns out your subscribers, your monthly donors, or your customers are often the most valuable single gift or single purchase additional behaviors, because they are the most bought in, they are the most sold.
Yeah.
So in my experience in philanthropy, the average donor who gives on a monthly basis gives an additional 25% on
Hmm.
top of whatever they give on that recurring basis. So if I give, let's say, keep the math simple, $500 a year, so that's 40 some dollars a month, um, then the average donor will give another $100 on top of that through
Mhm.
one-time gifts. So
Mm.
one of the things we talk about
Yeah.
is, are you actually asking your recurring donors to give on some regular basis? because organizations will either say never ask them again because we don't want to mess
Mm,
up a good thing, which is not a good
yeah.
strategy, or they say no, let's ask them 30 times a year, and it's like no, that's not a good strategy either. So
Yeah.
just like a business, you want to think about what those in this, you might use the word upgrade or cross sell in the business world. And then the other thing is just simply upgrading their giving amounts. So like
Mm,
Spotify is a perfect example. We love Spotify. I've sent Spotify, I did the math recently, several $1,000s over the last few years
yeah.
because we love Spotify, and I was listening to it this morning as I wrote an article. And but my kids started using my Spotify account, Taylor, and so then
Mhm.
I had like one of those. Do you ever get that Spotify Wrapped? Do you know what I'm talking about? The end of the year, they do the like,
Yeah,
this is the
except
music you like.
yeah, 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 except I do, I'm a YouTube Premium, but they
Okay,
do, like, the same thing, and it's really funny because 'cause I'm like, "Wow, I listened to that song that
I know.
much."
Well, mine was hilarious because my two young daughters listen to different music than daddy, and so my
Yeah,
Spotify report was like, look at all this. I don't even remember what the artists were, but I was like, that's not my
yeah.
listening. And I was like, well, and then when we try to stream at the same time, it was like, oh no, you need a family plan to have 3 devices
Uh-huh.
streaming at the same
Oh,
time. And
yeah.
so I gladly send Spotify. I think it's like 17.99 or 16.99 a month now because my whole family uses it. We can
Mhm,
share. I make playlists for my girls. We have this wonderful experience of discovery, but we've essentially upgraded. I wasn't spending
mhm.
16.99 on Spotify 4 years ago, but they've
Yeah.
upgraded and increased the experience, and I pay more now. Well, charities haven't historically done much with that, and so that's another opportunity is to ask for increased giving or to increase the quote unquote price point.
Yeah, so the places I notice it the most, one, YouTube Premium did the same thing for me. It was like I was sitting here one day and my son was on Spotify, but just on the free plan and was like, "Mom, can I please get premium Spotify?" And I was like, "Well, I already paid for YouTube Premium." And then my husband, he just did everything on the free account and like I was like, "Well, why don't you just get premium?" He was like, "I don't wanna pay for it. I'll just watch the commercials." And I'm like, I wouldn't." So then eventually it all came together and yeah, now I paid 22.99 for a family plan for YouTube Premium, but it is really like it's worth it because
Yep.
I do the music stuff, but I also watch so many podcasts that like having it commercial free is really good. And, I will say that's one where I find it highly, highly valuable. Now the one where it bothers me is, like on the TV channels, the streaming, where
Oh,
just
yeah.
just the constant, like, upsell to be commercial free on those ones, I feel like is way more bait and switchy feeling for some
Oh, yeah.
reason.
Well, and now they're realizing, Netflix included, Disney Plus, oh, wait a second, we can make as much or more money actually using like TV ads, and it's so
Yeah,
funny how full circle these things are. I remember when I was a
yeah,
teenager, Taylor, watching TV, and I was like, someday you're gonna just be able to subscribe to the channels you want because in the olden days, right? You get the bundle
yeah,
and it's like 152 channels, and you're like, I watch 4 of these.
yeah,
And I remember thinking it's going to be such an amazing world when we can just subscribe. I wouldn't have used the word subscribe back then, but when we
yeah,
can just, pay for the 3 channels we use. And then now we're in that world and we're like, oh man, I've got a Disney Plus and a Hulu and
I
a
know,
Paramount Plus and a Peacock and and like, oh shoot, I want to
yeah.
watch the football game. Which one is that on? And like, oh, I
Yeah.
got,
Oh, I can't. Yeah. I
yeah,
have to subscribe to that one now just to watch a football game. Completely. I mean, I don't know. I've got all of them. It's ridiculous.
yep.
And then you still get stuck in situations. Yeah, exactly. And I noticed this recently, like particularly with sports, because this was relevant with trying to watch the national championship games recently. Is like each one. Wait, what? Where is it? How do I I don't have that one. Oh, I no, for the love of God, I am not subscribing for one thing else. I will watch something else.
Yeah. Yeah, all these industries go through these kind of moments of like maturity for lack of a better term. And we're
Uh-huh.
in some of the subscription areas, especially with streaming, we're definitely in that kind of unsettled okay, do I have to subscribe to everything? But now you even see
Yeah.
like Disney recently partnered with, I want to say it was Paramount or NBC, one of those, to basically say, well, if you just pay for this one bundle, then at least you get these things
Yeah.
together, right? They're starting to, it's
Yeah.
ironic, it's coming back the other way to essentially bundling.
Yeah, it is, it is. Alright, so I wanna talk a little bit more about, like, this customer experience with, like, overcoming challenges because, okay, I do think we're at this interesting point right now with customer experience or donor experience with these subscriptions. When it comes to creating a great experience, so when I first met you, we were yeah, like you said, we were both at a conference speaking, and you gave this talk about Disney and the Disney experience. I wanna talk about, like, can you bring that into
Mm,
creating, like, that Disney experience and that sort
yeah.
of, like, keynote that you do into this, like, realm of people who are thinking about either adding a subscription product or service to their business
Yep.
or to their organization?
Um, Absolutely. And I think the key mental model there is a subscription is not just taking your normal product, or if you're a charity, your normal offer or ask, and then just saying, would you give me 12 of those a year? That's the mistake that most organizations and especially charities will make, is they're just like, well, let's take what we do. So I'll give you an example. The first organization I ever worked with in the charitable sector was called Union Rescue Mission. Wonderful
Mhm,
organization, still doing great work in Southern California and Los Angeles. And they are the oldest rescue mission in Los Angeles and one of the largest in the United States. And they do wonderful work. The very first program I ever worked on, Taylor, was a monthly recurring subscription
mm,
giving program. This is 20 years ago, by the way.
mm,
And it was this idea of, at the time when I came in, it was what they called a meal a day program, meaning to
mm,
serve a homeless person a warm, hot meal cost $1.15 or whatever, because they had donated goods and volunteers that served those meals. And the bummer, Taylor, was that that was not a very good monthly giving ask. They had a small number of donors that gave, they had a pretty low fulfillment rate. And this is my illustration of, it's the best ask for rescue missions, like single gift ask, single purchase ask, was essentially a meal, because it was like super easy,
mhm,
super tangible, not that expensive. You could basically give an impulse gift at Thanksgiving time to help cover some meals. But it made for a really poor ongoing value proposition. So what we did, and this is again back in the day, the agency had decided to basically revamp the program into what we called representative child sponsorship. So we were telling you now stories of people who were family, women and children who were at the mission, who were benefiting from the organization services, and we need your help on an ongoing basis to help people like Sarah and her son Elijah and what they're going through. And so we were able to pivot the program. So part of it is not just taking your product and saying, how do we do this monthly or whatever, and truly thinking about, in the eye of the donor or the customer, what does ongoing value look like from you? And then the second thing I recommend, and I talk about this in the book, is really understanding and digging into your donor motivation or your customer motivation. And so it's very, you'll be familiar with the field of human centered design. Very much, how do we actually talk to our constituents and really get underneath what is it that they need? What is it that really fires their imagination, that gets them going around this topic area, right? Whether it's music or giving to the homeless, and then using those donor or customer insights to then actually design a program that taps into those. Because the mistake charities make, and that agencies make, and that companies make, is they just assume they know, and so they just create the product and ship it. And it's like, well, actually,
mhm,
let's talk to the people who would be receiving this product on an ongoing basis, and let's talk about how this actually solves a problem for them, and how to design it around that.
mm, mm. Yeah, I think that's so important. I mean, that's really, in my opinion, the foundation of any successful marketing or sales is really understanding what your audience wants and then speaking in a way where you're bringing value to them as
Yep.
opposed to just like, "This is our widget, this is our widget, this is our widget,"
Yeah,
you
let's just
know?
sell it. Let's just bundle it differently. And
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of a good example. Well, rent it in music would be
Mhm.
a perfect example in the consumer side. Like if you would have told me 10 years ago, Dave, you should rent music from the music company, I would have been like, no, thank you. I have my
Mhm.
MP3 collection and I buy my songs on iTunes and they're 99 cents a piece. So that's not a big deal. It wasn't until Pandora and then ultimately Spotify
Yeah.
basically created this immersive experience where you're discovering music and it's recommending things and you can now, get access anytime on multiple devices and you can bring your family into the full like they provided so much more ongoing value than just quote unquote renting music. And
Mhm.
so I think businesses and charities need to think about what does that look like for us and how are we providing ongoing value.
Yeah. It's interesting. So it's like we've talked about Netflix. We've talked about a few things where I go back in my mind to the early days. You mentioned Facebook at the very beginning of this, and I'm like, I actually remember, I think the first time I got on Facebook, I was definitely in college, and I think I was at my favorite college bar, and people were, like, talking about it or something,
Mhm.
so I, like, went and looked it up. Um, but Netflix too, and how Netflix even has changed. Like, I think probably one of the first subscriptions I really recall, like, regularly paying for was Netflix in the DVD
DVD.
age
Yep.
when we were getting them in the mail, and I just remember being so excited about getting, like, my new DVD in the mail, like, when I'd ordered something, and then it's interesting how then there was, like, this a little bit of a shift in that before everything was on streaming to
Mhm.
then, like, Redbox, remember? Re and,
Mhm.
like, you
Yeah.
started being able to go and instead of like, "Oh, I don't have to pay for this subscription every month. I can just go get a movie when I want. It's like a buck." And now those are all starting to close down. All of the red boxes in my area now have a sign on them that say like, "Oh, this is no longer in service."
Yep.
And now we're back into this like sort of it's almost like a you can buy a movie one time on a streaming platform, but you can also subscribe to certain things. I don't know. It's just interesting to see how now I think we're seeing things come together in terms of like one-time offerings besides subscriptions. So I
Sure.
think I don't know, my thought on that is just like it's going to be a mix, if you think that subscriptions, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. If you think subscriptions is like the only way, I don't think it's the only way. I think it's like we're gonna be in this place where it's like I think it's about finding the right mix
Mhm.
of products and services that you can almost like pair one-time purchases alongside of subscriptions, and I think charities clearly do that as well.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily just one or the other, that you take the
Yeah.
buyer down.
Yeah, I don't know universally for all businesses, but I do think you're onto something. I think there has been an advantage of these subscription first organizations, I will say, in that they didn't try to port over sort of single purchase, single gift, single purchase type behavior to then just say do that monthly. But then you
Mhm,
do see them backing into, purchases. Disney, we talked about them.
mhm.
They're quite good at both getting you to,
Yeah,
take that trip to Disneyland if people are watching the video here, or I've got a Disneyland sign right over my shoulder. And they absolutely would love that one-time revenue, of going on that trip, but they're also going to sell the membership, program. And so I do think you're absolutely right. I don't even want to call it a balance because actually some of the organizations that are doing really well are really imbalanced. Like they're overly
mhm.
focused on subscriptions for a period of time, and then they might pivot over time. But there is definitely a tension there.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, we have people who don't want our subscription, but they want, like, a one-time
Yeah.
thing,
Yep.
and, so we've been even
How do you build that
ourselves as
in?
a business, like, trying to figure out when to present what, and I do think that when it comes down to it, it's really about at least in my business, it's about asking a lot of questions. You kind of mentioned that and doing like customer donor research, asking a lot of questions, really understanding what people need, and then pointing them down the right path
Yeah.
for that place and time.
It's funny you mentioned Netflix. We host a podcast. It's called the Purpose and Profit Podcast, and um, we interview business leaders and leaders of charities to talk about what are things we can learn from each other. In other words, and
Mhm.
so we just had a gentleman on this. We just wrapped up season 5, and his name's Tom Beck, and he was the one of the early sort of franchisees, operators for this company called Blockbuster Video in
Oh,
the 80s. And so they grew like mind boggling, in the early days. People talk about
yeah.
Blockbuster today as the sort of failed to transition to streaming model.
Mhm,
But
mhm,
really, Blockbuster was the innovator in delivering
mm,
entertainment, home entertainment, from theatrical releases. And this is where I think it's key, your point about whether it's DVDs or streaming or, in-store rentals or red boxes or whatever,
mhm,
is that the mission doesn't change of the organization, but the model absolutely needs to
mhm.
evolve and innovate to keep up with delivering on the mission. So if
Yeah,
Netflix, which literally started with DVDs, to your point, had said, well, we now own the mail in
yeah,
DVD market, well, they also would be a an old story. And I remember candidly reading the business headlines when the CEO was investing, billions of dollars a year in creating original content. This was about the time, by the way, that Disney
yeah.
said, we're going to pull all of our content from Netflix,
I remember that, yeah.
and at first I thought, wow, that what a ballsy decision to make, to like invest all
Mhm,
this money in your own content. Well, that's worked out for them, right? Because it's turned out
mhm,
original programming is what keep people around. But I think for whether you're a business leader, marketer, or a charity leader listening, one of the lessons is get really clear on your mission and what you're trying to accomplish in the world, but don't confuse that with your model and how you accomplish that, because
mm,
your model may need to evolve, and not may, it probably will need to evolve. And how does it need to evolve? I can't speak to your specific situation, but you absolutely need to not make the mistake that Blockbuster and so many businesses have made, that they just were like, no, 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 we do VHS tapes or DVDs in physical, 10,000
mhm.
square foot stores, because maybe people won't
Yeah,
need DVDs in the future.
yeah. I love that. Your mission is not your model. Yeah, that's powerful. Alright, so Dave, if people wanna get in touch with you, learn more, read the book as it comes out, I know it's coming out in what, a couple of
Yeah,
weeks.
as we record this,
What's
we're right on top of it.
what's the best way to find you on the
Easy way,
interweb?
if you're on LinkedIn, just look me up, Dave Raley, Raley. If you want to look for the book, it's just sustainablegiving.org. That will also send you over to the Imago website. So that's the easiest way to get there, just sustainablegiving.org. And yeah, just excited. I'm glad we could make this happen right at this moment.
Yeah.
So exciting.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, no, and I was just so happy to meet you when we met. We definitely had a lot in common, and I think we were at the conference, and then we ended up at the same dinner after the conference, and we were like, "Yeah, uh-huh, like,
Let's
I
talk.
see you." Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So, good to see you, good to catch up. Thanks so much for coming on and talking about this today, and, please get in touch with Dave if you wanna learn more about his work, in the charity space, and until next time, I hope you go get some of that good shizzle done.